Storydoor presents The Sapphire Sword by Robert L. Fuller. Chapter 1. It was all the dog's fault, the altogether unexpected end of the world. But none of them knew that until after breakfast. By them, I mean the Orion family, a respectable cluster of humanoids residing in the mountains of New Mexico. And by the end of the world, well, I suppose you'll have to read on. At the start of this story, the Orion children sat at their kitchen table, happy as larks since Dad had made his world-famous cinnamon rolls, big as cobblestones, soft and steaming, and covered with a buttery cinnamon goo. Scout, the youngest and the only girl, sat proudly at the head of the table and dished out the goods with an oversized spatula, as Dad rescued the kitchen from his culinary carnage. With much delight and sticky fingers, the children devoured their breakfast. Flint, the blonde-headed middle child with a penchant for comic books, sat hunched over the table, turning the colored pages of Superman number 425 with his teeth. Older brother, known to all as Slugger on account of his brawn, scowled at his younger brother's lack of table manners. "You look like a dog," he said. Flint ignored the comment and continued eating, but this only served to stoke the coals of his brother's annoyance. "Will you eat like a human, please?" "Slugger," Dad called from the kitchen, where he wiped down a countertop with a rag. "He can eat however he wants. It's Saturday." "But Dad," he protested, "I thought you said you were trying to raise well-mannered children and not a pack of hyenas." He pointed to Flint. "Look at him." Their father finished cleaning, draped the soiled rag over a shoulder, and joined them at the table. "It's true I promised your mother I'd make sure you acted like human beings, but like I said, it's Saturday, and everyone knows that most rules regarding manners don't apply on the weekend. If they did, I would have made you wear a tie and fed you tofu omelets and almond milk." "Gross!" Flint looked up from his comic in wide-eyed disgust. "Nasty," Scout agreed, and licked her fingers of residual cinnamon. Slugger took a deep breath, narrowed his eyes at his father, then proceeded to stuff half a pound of cinnamon roll into his mouth. "Saturday indeed," Dad smiled and dove in as well. By 10 that morning, the three children had packed their lunches in backpacks, slung canteens over their shoulders, and set out on a quest for wild cherries on the mountain behind their house. Each was aided by a perfectly sized walking stick, hand-carved by Dad from ashwood branches the year before. Come rain, snow, or shine, they considered themselves modern-day Lewis and Clarks, commissioned to explore the world. "Remember," their father shouted as they darted out the back door straight into the woods, "be back before dark." Pine trees spiked the mountainside in all directions as the children jogged at a decent clip along a trail they'd crossed countless times before. They knew every curve, every boulder, every fallen log along the way. The chances of getting lost were minuscule at best, as long as they stayed on the path. "I hope the deer haven't got to the cherries yet," Flint said between labored breaths as they ran. "I know, me too," Scout said. "Last year I didn't get a single taste. So sad." "Will you two stop worrying?" Slugger yelled back over his shoulder. "There's a cherry grove we've never even tried yet on the far side of the mountain, way down toward the base." "You mean by the old quarry?" Flint asked. "Yep." Scout frowned. "Dad said not to go that far. He says it's too dangerous." Slugger scoffed. "False. Dad never said not to go there exactly." "Dad did say not to go there," Scout protested. "Actually," Flint said, "you're both right. Dad did say the quarry was too dangerous, but he never actually forbade a visit." Slugger offered a victorious bow as he ran. "Exactly." "I say we just go and be extra careful," Flint continued, "if there are cherries to be had." Slugger nodded. "I heartily concur." "Well," Scout said, "if we end up getting in trouble, I'm blaming the boys." "You go ahead and do that," Slugger added. As the trail wound up and up the mountain, growing steeper by the moment, their exhaustion muzzled any remaining arguments. Once they reached the summit, marked by a cluster of granite boulders and a huge pine tree with charred bark, the lone survivor of a century-old forest fire, They paused just long enough to catch their breath and marvel at the crystal blue sky above and the glorious green wilderness below. "Onward we go?" Slugger asked, then took off without waiting for an answer. Still winded from the hike, the younger two siblings moaned with displeasure, but followed nonetheless. At least the rest of the journey was downhill. Following the trail as it wound and meandered along bluffs and gullies, they finally reached the foot of the mountain, marked by unusually gargantuan pines and spruces, none of them victimized by the merciless logging practices of previous generations. The forest here was so dense, in fact, it felt like perpetual twilight. The air was still and windless, the ground covered with a thick layer of dead brown needles. With trees like marble columns and birds like handbells ringing down some distant hall, it almost felt like walking through an ancient church cathedral. Even their voices grew hushed with reverence. "It's so beautiful here," Scout whispered. Slugger pressed on ahead. "You ain't seen nothing yet." Flint called out from behind his brother. "I doubt we'll find any cherries down this way. The deer surely have eaten them by now." "O ye of little faith," Slugger said. "Look," Scout shouted. "I see a clearing up ahead." They quickened their pace once more until the ancient pines gave way to shorter scrub brush and cedar and a scattering of oak trees. The path turned right, then left, then headed straight on at a steep angle until it opened up into a grassy field dotted with wildflowers. They waded out into the swaying weeds and stopped. Slugger looked around a moment, pondering. "Okay," he said. "If I remember right, the quarry should be about 300 yards that way." He pointed to the west. "And the cherry trees go right up to the edge of it." "The edge of it?" Flint asked. "Are you serious?" "I am indeed." "Dad would not like this," Scout said softly, guilt already weakening her resolve. "My gosh, you two sound like a couple of old ladies. I'm taking you to the edge of the quarry, not into the quarry. Besides, when your bellies are full of cherries, you'll thank me for the risk." The two younger siblings just stared back in a mixture of hesitation and hunger. They wanted those cherries, but they didn't want to risk the trouble. Slugger rolled his eyes and pressed on, jogging across the field and into the far line of shorter trees that quickly dropped off at an unsettling angle. Before they knew it, they were smack dab in the middle of the biggest stand of cherry trees any of them had ever seen, fruit so thick and ripe on every limb the branches sagged toward the ground. Scout laughed out loud, reached up and plucked 4 cherries in one hand, popping all into her mouth. When she turned to face her brothers, bright red cherry juice was already running down her chin. She spit out 4 pits like a machine gun. "Yummy," she squealed. "See?" Slugger grinned. "I told you." "Sorry for doubting you," Flint said, attacking the nearest branch with zeal. Slugger plucked a single cherry and tossed it in the air, catching the glistening red orb in his mouth as deftly as a circus act. As he chewed, he made his way further on until he could see the unmistakable edge of the quarry in the distance. "I'll be right back," he said to the others. "Oh, no, you don't," Scout said through a mouthful of dripping cherry mush. "You're trying to go to the quarry." "Yep." "Well," she wiped her mouth, swallowed. "I'll go with you to make sure you don't do anything stupid." "That's very kind of you." "I'm coming too," Flint called out, running after them. When they reached the quarry itself, none of them were prepared for its mind-numbing proportions. They stood shoulder to shoulder, mere feet from the drop-off, their mouths all but gaping. "It's got to be 200 feet deep," Flint said. "And that's just to the water," Slugger added. "Probably double that or more to the absolute bottom." "It gives me the creeps," Scout said, clutching the side of Slugger's t-shirt to keep from falling in. "What was this even for?" Slugger asked no one in particular. Flint wasted no time to answer. "Dad told me once they thought there was marble in the mountains, like 100 years ago or something. They dug and dug and dug, but never found anything. Then they finally abandoned the whole operation right before World War I or something, when all the workers went to fight. And now it's a big, bottomless lake in the middle of nowhere," Slugger added. "I heard Dad say once, all the roads heading in or out to this place are long gone, overgrown or washed out. Nobody can get in here." They all 3 looked on in silence for a moment, a light breeze rippling their hair. "There's something else strange," Scout said as she observed surrounding vegetation. "What is it?" Flint asked. "Look at the brush and the lower branches of the trees." "Yeah, so?" Slugger said. "On the other spots of the mountain, these lower leaves are all gone, eaten by deer or elk or something. But it's like no animal likes to come down here." "That would explain why the cherries were untouched," Flint said. "Uh-oh." Scout covered her mouth, her eyes going wide. "What's wrong?" Slugger asked. "Do you think the quarry is like poison or something? Like in the water? Maybe the animals know something we don't." "Relax, Scout," Flint said. "If those cherries are poisoned, we'd be dead already." "You really think so?" she asked, with eyebrows raised hopefully. "I do," Flint said with a confident nod. "Okay, good." Out of nowhere, the distant howl of a dog sliced through the air, ringing through the trees, echoing off the quarry walls below. The children froze at the sound. "What was that?" Scout asked. "Might be a coyote," Slugger said. "Or a wolf," Flint suggested. Scout shivered. "I thought Dad said all the wolves were gone from New Mexico. They were hunted out like 1,000,000 years ago." "Not 1,000,000, Flint corrected. "Geez, I know that. I was just being dramatic." "Well, whatever it is, it's a ways up the mountain," Slugger said. "I propose we investigate." "You can't be serious," Flint said. "For all we know, that thing is rabid and ready to eat us all. I say we just head home." "Chicken much?" Slugger said with a laugh, and took off running before either of them had the wherewithal to follow. "Really?" Flint said with a groan, and darted after him, with Scout bringing up the rear. When they reached the clearing, their nostrils were met with a sudden waft of death. A stench so pungent it watered their eyes. "Gross! What is that?" Flint asked. "I don't know," Slugger said, grimacing, "but it wasn't here before. Strange." Scout noticed something laying deep in the grass up ahead. "What's that?" she pointed. At first, it looked like nothing more than a clump of fur. But as the three of them slowly inched forward, they could see it was a dog. The stench was stronger than ever there, flies buzzing about in a hungry frenzy. Was it dead? Why hadn't they smelled or seen it on the way in? Being a lover of all things animal, Scout took a furtive step forward, eyes set on the creature. It wasn't moving, but she could see the telltale rise and fall of its chest. It was alive, but barely. Something was curled around its lower legs, black thorny vines pushing out from a crack in the ground. She narrowed her eyes at such a strange sight. Slugger yanked her back by the shirt collar. "Let go of me," Scout protested, squirming free. "It's just a puppy. I think it's hurt." Slugger pushed past her and dropped to his knees. Flint joined him, holding up his walking stick for protection just in case. Scout was right that it was a dog, but this was no puppy. "Looks like a kind of poodle mix," Scout said. "Or a Bernedoodle," Flint offered. "I read about them one time. It's a poodle-Bernese mountain dog mix. Supposed to be pretty smart." "Well, whatever it is, it's not doing too hot now," Slugger said. Scout squeezed her face between her brother's shoulders and reached down to touch its coat. "Don't!" Slugger grabbed her hand. "It might be diseased." "Will you calm down?" She wrenched her hand free and ran her fingers along its upper back, gingerly at first, then with increasing pressure. Flint examined the animal from head to foot, taking in every detail he could. "These vines look poisonous to me. I've never seen anything like it." He reached out a trembling hand. "Don't touch it," Slugger barked. At that moment, the vines seemed to move, pushing further up from the ground and wrapping tighter around the dog's legs, all the way to its smooth-skinned belly. A black, tar-like substance dripped from the vine as it moved, fresh stench hitting them harder than ever. "Oh my gosh, that's awful!" Slugger held his nose, backing away. "Let's leave it alone." "No," Scout protested. "This dog needs our help." "It's dead, Scout. Can't you smell that?" Flint said. "It breathed," Scout cried, pointing to its ribs. "I saw. Didn't y'all see it?" "I don't know," Flint said, scratching behind his ear. "Maybe." "What do you mean, maybe? Don't you know what breathing looks like?" "Shut it," Slugger interrupted. "We've wasted enough time already. Let's just get out of here." "Absolutely not," Scout declared. She reached for a fallen branch and began the tedious and odorous process of pulling away the vines from the canine's body. "Wait a second," Slugger said. "What do you think you're doing?" But Scout didn't answer. The brothers watched in wide-eyed wonder as their sister managed to clear away the vines. though many thorns seemed to cling to the dog with tenacious vigor. Minutes later, after much teeth-clenching effort, the vines lay limp on the ground and the dog was free, albeit still covered in foul goo. Scout reached down and scooped the dog into her arms, though it was half her size. "I'm taking this poor creature back home. It'll die if we don't help it. Mountain lions will get it for sure. I'm going to nurse it back to health." "What are you, some kind of vet? Come on." Slugger tried to reason with her, but she was already a dozen feet down the trail with the dog hanging limp in her arms. The brothers watched her go, traded knowing looks, then with a string of shrugs and sighs, followed their pigtailed little sister all the way up the mountain and down toward the house, taking turns carrying the animal along the way. "Now what do we have here?" Father asked. His children already had the dog wrapped in a blanket on the back porch. Scout rested her hand on its head and looked up with eyes brimming. "It's hurt, Daddy." "That I can see," he said. "Not to mention filthy and soiling Mom's favorite patchwork quilt." He crouched on his haunches. "Where'd you find it?" They told him. "Can we keep it?" Scout asked. "Please?" "You can't be serious," Slugger said, crossing his arms. "It's practically roadkill. I give it a day before it's crawling with maggots." Dad reached down and placed his hand on the dog's side. He waited a moment, then looked up. "It's not dead. Well, not yet at least." Slugger slowly shook his head. "What are we going to do with a half-dead Bernedoodle?" Dad shrugged his shoulders and grinned. "Nurse it back to health, I suppose." Slugger blinked, stone-faced. "You do realize that I've been asking for a Siberian Husky for as long as I can remember, to which you refuse, and now Squirt here brings home a borderline corpse and you go all spineless?" Dad ignored the insult and tried his best to explain. "I'm not promising to keep it forever. It might end up rabid and foaming at the mouth. I'm just saying we take care of it for a while, at least until it can walk on its own. It's the least we can do." "Yay!" Scout shouted with a giggle and laid down beside the dog to look into its sleeping face. Flint sat down beside her. "What should we call it?" Without hesitation, Scout kissed the cold, wet nose of the dog and declared her decision. "Robin Hood," she said, beaming. "Its name is Robin Hood." None of them had any idea what unstoppable calamity had just been set in motion. Stay tuned for Chapter 2 of The Sapphire Sword, coming soon on Storydoor. This is Robert Fuller, the author and creator of The Sapphire Sword, and I just want to offer my heartfelt thanks for you tuning in and giving this a listen. I am so excited to bring you along on this adventure that awaits our characters, Slugger, Flint, and Scout. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be full of twists and turns and peril and the unexpected, and I think you're going to really, really enjoy it. But if I could ask you to do me one more favor, if you could press that little nifty subscribe button, give me a review, whatever review you would like. Of course, 5 stars is awesome, but honest reviews are great too. Leave a comment, that really helps, and it just lets me know who's listening, and that's really exciting to see. And lastly, before I go, I wanted to let you know that the Storydoor podcast is not just going to be the Sapphire Sword. There's going to be other epic stories. There's going to be other story experiences, and I'm really excited about how that will unfold. And I'd ask that you go along on the journey with us. All right, that's it. More stories to come, and we'll see you soon.